Hey guys, it's episode 2 of Saneball. I'm Brandon Warren, your host. You can find me on Twitter at Brandon_Warren. And we still have no idea what we're doing. Again, episode 2. But today, we're going to talk about 5 moves the Minnesota Twins should make between now and the 2020 season to defend their AL Central crown. Now, as you may know, you can see Jason Kubel's autographed jersey behind me. I have grown up a Twins fan. I cover the Twins for a website called Zone Coverage right now. This will not necessarily be a Minnesota specific show, and we'll see how it kind of evolves as time goes on. But it kind of stood up to me that maybe it was a good idea to talk about the Twins today, just to kind of get this show off the ground and see, what this is all going to be about. So I have again 5 moves the Twins should make to defend their AL Central crown from 2019. Now, it's a very important distinction that I didn't say need to. I don't believe in that kind of, I don't know, I think need to is kind of clickbaity. I think it's kind of, if any one of these 5 doesn't happen, the whole plan is screwed. But I did narrow it down to 5 moves that I think the Twins, if they make, would have a fairly good chance, maybe not of repeating 101 wins, but definitely repeating and defending their crown in the American League Central. So, number 1, sign Zach Wheeler. Now, I know fans want Steven Strasburg, they want Garrett Cole, but from an asset allocation standpoint, if you sign Zach Wheeler at, let's say, 4 years and $80 million total, you can coach up a guy like him, the strikeouts, the big-time stuff, the grounders, doesn't walk anybody, keeps the ball in the ballpark at his best. There's really nothing physically that he can't do that should put him in, maybe not the exact realm of a Garrett Cole or a Steven Strasburg, but for $20 million a year as opposed to $35 million per year, I really do think that it makes more sense from an allocation of resources and assets to go after Zach Wheeler. Again, maybe probably the third best starter on the market, depending on how you view Madison Bumgarner, Hyunjin Ryu, and maybe a few others. But yeah, I think Wheeler's the guy that it's got to be. You can talk about if he'd start game 1 of the season or game 2. I suspect game 2 just out of loyalty to Jose Barrios. But here's the other thing. Everyone talks about how the Twins need to go out and get impact pitching. And a lot of times if you list anyone who they don't think of as a big-time pitcher, they say you're wasting your time. Well, first of all, you're not going to go 1 through 5 with big type of guys like, Houston, for instance, with Verlander, Cole, and Greinke. And also, too, keep in mind that in losing Cole, most likely, they're going to be left with 2 mid-30s guys making in the $30 million range. That's eating up a lot of their payroll. So sure, they made it to the World Series this year, but they're going to have to start thinking about extending your Carlos Correas, your George Springers, and those kinds of guys. I know they have Altuve down for a long time, but some of their young players, and maybe those guys have signed deals, but I'm just saying they still have some significant young talent, Alex Bregman, that they've got to figure some things out. And so I just think it makes sense to still continue that gradual build payroll-wise. Hopefully the Twins settle in that 140, 150 range this year and continue to climb from there. But again, so I think Zach Wheeler makes more sense, especially with the volatility and health of pitchers being an issue. And Steven Strasburg, has had some health issues in his past. So he's obviously an indicator of what can happen if a pitcher isn't healthy. So too is Wheeler, who lost a fairly big chunk of time right after he was a big-time prospect. So, again, the more assets you put into one player, the more the boom-bust proposition of your season is. And that's why I kind of think if you're going to go with pitching, spread it around just a little bit. Again, I'm not saying don't spend money, but I'm saying build yourself a little more depth. Speaking of that depth, number 2. And I talked about this in a recent article on ZoneCoverage.com. Trade Eddie Rosario to the Marlins, plus whatever prospects are necessary for Sandy Alcantara. Now, I'm not saying Eddie Rosario and Royce Lewis. I'm not saying Eddie Rosario and Alex Kirilloff, Trevor Larnach. But I'm saying if you can find a happy ground where they want maybe a Ben Rortvedt, a Brent Rook, or whoever they want that is maybe in that comfortable 6 to 10, 12 range, maybe even a couple prospects, if you can get something done, you should do it. Now, I understand the skepticism. Why would the Marlins trade Alcantara? He was an all-star this year. Granted, every team gets a representative. But this is also a team that's traded Luis Castillo and Chris Paddock in recent years, and they were not even in the big leagues yet. Just a tremendous disaster of epic proportions of the guys they've traded. Now, If Alcantara is not on the table, the Twins analytics team has to look at Caleb Smith, Jordan Yamamoto, and Pablo Lopez. If they think that any one of those three guys is someone they can coach up and build into a very good pitcher, especially early in their career as they are on the cheaper side of things before they get into those ARB1, ARB2, ARB3 years. Again, you want to start with a young mold of ball of clay you can mold into whatever pitcher you think he can become. And so, again, Alcantara, to me, I know the numbers are a little iffy, not a ton of strikeouts. The grounders have been good, but not great. But he kept the ball in the park, and this is a guy who throws in the mid-90s, has a good slider, and again, too, we get a little bit tied up in the idea that a guy has to really hit the ground running, but even some of the greatest pitchers of all time didn't hit the ground running in their careers, and I just think that Alcantara, again, not that he's destined to be a legend, but he's got all the markers of a young pitcher finding his way, and if you can take him and push him to that next level, again, you're creating a much better pitcher than you're trading for. And maybe I meant to say this about Wheeler and Barrios, and maybe I forgot. If I didn't, please indulge me. But if the Twins sign Wheeler instead of Cole or Strasburg, and you start thinking about how they'll measure up against the Astros or against, let's say, the Yankees get Garrett Cole, and then it's Garrett Cole and James Paxton and Luis Severino. The point, this all hinges on how Jose Barrios develops. If Jose Barrios doesn't take probably another half step forward or becomes a guy who you can really trust in October, it's really difficult to envision the Twins having success pretty much no matter what they do, because, I mean, you go get Garrett Cole, but if you go get Garrett Cole, you're going to lean even more heavily on Jose Barrios, because you're not signing Garrett Cole and Madison Bumgarner. You're not signing Garrett Cole and Zach Wheeler or Hyunjin Ryu or any of these higher tier guys. So, again, that pivot point is going to be Jose Barrios. And so if you can have Wheeler, Barrios, and then you've got three guys behind them that you think are really interesting, I know that people are going to say, well, then you can't go toe-to-toe with the Nationals. You can't go toe-to-toe. Keep in mind the Nationals were one error from a right fielder by the Brewers, or for the Brewers, by their right fielder, Trent Grisham, from not even making the division series. So again, you can get all tied up in whose starting pitchers are great and whatever, but it's not a copycat league. It's not like the NFL and the Wildcat 15 or 10 years ago where everyone has to be like that. You build the best team you can within your constraints, within your talents, within your farm system, and then you kind of go to battle. And if a team went up against the Nationals that had a crazy offense and not as good a pitching this year, granted the Astros had both and still lost. So again, getting too tied up in the idea that you have to match a team 1-for-1, 3 deep with aces to even have a chance of winning the World Series, it falls flat with me. So you go get Alcantara, another guy you hope you can kind of ramp up and become your next Jose Barrios, your next whatever you want to call him. But again, too, this is, again, leaning heavily on Wes Johnson and hopefully Jeremy Hefner, depending on if he leaves to join the Mets coaching staff, which makes a lot of sense based on where he pitched in the big leagues. But you're basically going to put a lot of trust in your team to coach up the guys you get rather than necessarily paying top-end market value for the top talents. And honestly, I think that's a more sustainable method anyway. So, yeah, so far we got sign Zach Wheeler, trade for Sandy Alcantara, and at the same time, too, this is a point of contention of moving Eddie Rosario. I know people don't like moving a guy who just hit 30 home runs, but 300 on-base percentage, not great corner outfield defense, and maybe the value isn't there for him to get something like that, so then you hold on to him, like I wrote the other night. But Eddie Rosario in Miami makes so much sense to me. You got James Rouse in there, you've got Eddie being close to his homeland in Puerto Rico, and I mean, he just got that Miami swag, and I just think he would look good in Miami. I don't know how else to say it. So I know they're interested in Nicholas Castellanos. They're interested in Avisail Garcia, Yasiel Puig, those kinds of guys. Eddie Rosario fits right there. If you can't get those guys to take your money, pursue a trade. They do have some pitching depth. I mean, they're fairly deep. Jose Urena is another name to think about. I don't know if he's going to be a bullpen guy for good now or what, but he kind of seems like the older version of Alcantara to me, and another guy who might be interesting. Okay, Number 3, sign a capable bench bat. The two guys that come to mind for me are Justin Smoke and Howie Kendrick. I know Smoke doesn't make a ton of sense because he only plays first base and DH, and they've got Nelson Cruz, and fairly good chance CJ Cron will be back, barring something we haven't heard yet. But the 26th roster spot means there will be either an extra pitcher or an extra bench bat. With how things have gone in recent seasons, I feel like it'll be a 13-13 split to start, which in my estimation means you'd add another bench bat. So Kendrick can play second, he can play third, he can play first, he can play a little bit of outfield, maybe not where you want him. But again, 2 DH possibilities on days that Nelson Cruz might need a day off. And I'm pretty sure he hit like 344 this year for the Nationals. So, I mean, you're coming off a pretty great year. He wants to play one more year. Probably wants another chance at a ring. Twins can offer him that. So, I think that's a good thing. And Smoke, he's just got some pop. He's the kind of guy you can bring off the bench in a big spot and, maybe give you some power. And if he hits really well, because obviously he had some really nice years in Toronto, maybe he's your starting first baseman. I don't know. I don't know if Cron's going to be back. There's a lot to look into as far as where he's at with his wrist and that sort of thing. But we'll see. Anyway, it also might make some sense to bring in someone who can play the outfield, especially if Eddie Rosario is out of the picture, because does Marwin Gonzalez play first base or left field every day? Does he play anywhere every day? Are you comfortable with Jake Cave and Lamont Wade until someone like Alex Kirilloff or Trevor Larnach is ready? Do you go sign someone? I know Avisail Garcia makes some sense, but is he going to want a 1 or 2 year deal? Finding a bridge guy shouldn't be that difficult. Adam Jones, that kind of guy. I don't know what the plan is, but yeah. And originally I thought David Freese made a lot of sense for this role. You talk about a guy with postseason pedigree, can really hit lefties, but then he up and retired. So kind of out of the picture for that. Number 4, bring back Michael Pineda. And I know that's probably not going to be super popular, but I also say maybe even bring back Kyle Gibson too. And I don't hate the idea of Martin Perez on another cheap deal. Now let's unpack all of this. Now what I'm saying is, and I'll read the 4 pitchers that we have in the rotation now, because my 5th point is one more starting pitcher, because again, they have a lot of pitching needs. So if you bring back Pineda, you probably don't have him for the first, I think it's 5 or 6 weeks of the season, which means your rotation is Wheeler, Barrios, the Pineda spot, Sandy Alcantara, and then the 5th guy, who I'll talk about here in just a minute. So if you bring back Kyle Gibson, and I think you can get a fairly reasonable deal, there has been some discussion of if he could get a 2-year deal in that 16, 18, 20 million range. If that happens, I think you bow out gracefully if you're the Twins, because I don't know that you want a 2-year deal with Gibson right now. It's probably not unfair that he would want 2 years if he can get it. This is his first chance to be a free agent, and he's not super young. He's 32. So if you can get him back on a 1-year deal, put some incentives in there, whatever, that's your guy to get you to when Pineda comes back. And then, you kind of have some wiggle room with sending Gibson to the bullpen. Maybe Alcantara starts slow and you can send him out. You got a lot of options here. And anytime you think you have too many starting pitchers, you're just kind of fooling yourself. Now, it's a valid question. Would Gibson rather come back to the Twins as a starter for the first 5 weeks and possibly like a Jesse Chavez swingman? If he can get, let's just say hypothetically, he could get a 2-year deal starting for, he lives in St. Louis. Who knows if the Cardinals need a starter, or even if the Royals need starters, which they obviously do. If he can get a 2-year deal from another team, or if he can get a 1-year deal from the Twins, I know he would like to be back with the Twins. He's told me as much. But I have to believe if he gets a multi-year deal elsewhere, he's going to do that to take care of his family, and I have the utmost respect for that. So, still, though, what I think Gibson could bring to the table is the ability to kind of bridge that gap until Pineda comes back. I'm less sold on the idea of Martin Perez being that guy, although he could, but I think Perez would be more along the lines of just a bullpen arm, because I think you get him dialing back 96, 97. He's got a pretty good, I'm trying to remember, I think it was a slider, but I'm not sure. But, I think, again, if the bullpen gets longer too, if they go 14 guys out there, it's never going to hurt to have a guy who, can throw like that and give you a little bit of length too. As for Pineda, again, I know it's not super popular, but the Twins are going to value him more than anyone else is. They know what's going on with him. He wants to be back. We'll see if the Twins want him back. He knows the mistake he made. Not at liberty to share some of the things that I've heard, but it really seems a lot less severe than maybe it really should be. So we'll see what happens there, but I really do think Michael Pineda, especially with how he's kind of torpedoed his market, really brings himself back into focus as a potential number 3 starter for the Twins. And is it a 1-year deal? Probably. But then at that point, they could QO him after next year because they didn't do it this year. So I think that might be the way to go. So we'll see what happens. Finally, number 5, the Minnesota Twins should sign Rick Porcello. Really? This is a guy who had the worst ERA among all qualified starters in baseball this year. I want to say it was 5.52. So, hear me out. The Twins need to cover 3 rotation spots worth of innings because Jake Odorizzi accepted the qualifying offer. If you assume that's about 500 innings, you still have a lot of innings to cover here. And what better than the guy who's thrown 160-plus innings 11 straight seasons? So, again, the price will be down on Porcello after a tough year. But the markers, to me, have shown the potential to be a good pitcher. And I'm not talking about winning the Cy Young or anything. Even in 2018, he struck out a batter per inning. You can work with that. And if you, again, put the trust in Wes Johnson and his crew to find one little tweak here or there, this isn't like this is a guy who's striking out 6 batters per 9 innings or 5.5, like some Mike Pelfrey stuff. Which, again, Kyle Gibson, to be honest with you, went from that guy to who he is now, striking out a batter per inning. But my belief is that Porcello, obviously a very gifted pitcher, durable, has pitched well enough to win a Cy Young in the past, even though I think it pissed off Kate Upton, if I'm not mistaken. I do think there's a tweak in there. And again, this is a guy who's going to be going into his age 31 season. So it's not as much teaching an old dog new tricks. It's just maybe a small tweak here or there, and I think that there's still a fairly good chance that there's maybe something left uncovered in there. You look at Charlie Morton making big late career changes. Again, he woke up one day and decided to throw 97 miles an hour. Is that going to happen with Rick Porcello? I can't say that it will. But I think 30, 31 is not too late to make a tweak to the point where maybe you sharpen up a slider or you cut a couple of your pitches off or go from a sinker to a four-seam fastball or pitch up in the zone like Jake Odorizzi did. I think the idea that you want the Twins to get all aces is dumb. You need to be measured. You need to be prudent. You need to be creative. All markers of this current Twins front office. And why not buy low on Rick Porcello? I think you sign a 1-year deal for $8 million. The second year is a team option at $12 million. You got to have a second year, though, because if you're going to spend an entire year rebuilding a guy, you need to have that team option to keep yourself protected in case he really does blow up. Because then you've got that whole second year to negotiate a longer-term deal. Again, he'd only be 32, so there's still room for some kind of medium to long-term marriage there. And again, this is the kind of guy that looks like he could pitch for a very long time. Isn't the kind of guy that lights up the strike zone, but he's just a good, solid, durable guy that gets it done. If this is your number 4 or 5 starter, you have a very, very good rotation. I think he'd like to get out of the meat grinder that is Boston. And so, yeah, you get a 1-year deal with an option on it, a team option that leaves Brusdar Graterol, Randy Dobnak, Devin Smeltzer, maybe even Zach Littell as your insurance starters 6, 7, 8, and 9. That's depth, man. As much as you might want Randy Dobnak to get a crack at one of those rotation spots, I just don't know that you can give him a chalk outline of 160 to 180 big league innings and then say, listen, we won the division last year. You've got to hold down those innings and not have a 5 ERA at the end of the year. So, I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I do think that Rick Porcello makes a ton of sense for this Minnesota Twins team. So let's run over these just one more time before we're done. Sign Zach Wheeler. Trade Eddie Rosario to the Marlins for Sandy Alcantara. Obviously going to kick in some prospects there. Sign a capable bench bat. We're talking Justin Smoke. We're talking Howie Kendrick. Bring back Michael Pineda and probably Kyle Gibson. Maybe even Martin Perez, but not completely related. And then finally, sign Rick Porcello. If you do these 5 things, the Minnesota Twins will win the division next year. I am very confident. All right, we'll see you again next time. Peace.